Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm running a couple minutes late. It's great to see all of you. We are on chapters 7 and 8. Um, and I mean, as we've talked about, almost every chapter in this book is really good. And as I just heard, Meredith reflecting, a lot of it is echoed in some of his other books. But this chapter 7, is really it echoes an argument that he's made before, and it's really addressing a kind of a tension, and that's the tension between sort of freedom and obedience, or freedom and slavery, free will and an omnipotent God. How do we reconcile what does freedom really mean? And that is obviously that's a tremendous issue. Really is, especially in the world today, in the Western world, and a time when we think about what's the meaning of democracy, what is self-government? Can democracy survive? Does it work? Wasn't Churchill who said democracy is the worst form of government except for every other one? And it really, what Sachs does here is probe into the meaning of freedom and democracy, and that's kind of the tension with which he starts the chapter. And I think one really salient point, and one that I think is important, kind of very critical to remember, is the way he does a corrective of history. We often think that freedom, the idea of democracy and freedom, started in ancient Greece and then really culminated in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. What Sachs says is that actually that's not right. That freedom has always been, it's within the human consciousness, and that the Hebrew Bible is actually a tremendous source. It's a tremendous guide to freedom. Now, the Hebrew Bible is not by any means a democratic document. It's a theocratic document. It's based on a worldview with God as the greatest authority, and that there are legitimate interpreters of that authority. So the people, in democracy, the people are the authority. In a theocracy, God is the authority. And the Hebrew Bible is clearly a theocracy. However, the notion of individual liberty is part and parcel of the Hebrew Bible, and it's the story of freedom is really integrated with the story of religious freedom. This is actually, again, another really critical, salient point. Have you ever asked yourself, why does the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights deal with religion? If we had to write the Bill of Rights today, I doubt the first one would deal with religion. The idea of religious freedom was a critical component of how the American founders understood the meaning of freedom, because they had experienced so much religious persecution. The pilgrims, those who came over. So liberty of conscience, of the ability to think and pray as one so desires, is a critical understanding of freedom. And so that there would probably be no such thing as pluralism, as a sense of freedom, had there not been a Hebrew Bible that lent itself to other interpretations. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the search for religious freedom ultimately led to the search for freedom more broadly. That's why it's often called the first freedom. There's a foundation called, I think it's called the First Freedom Foundation, which is all about religious freedom. And this paragraph on this is a great paragraph. He captures so much history in one paragraph. This is on page 129. The 17th century was a century of the Hebrew Bible. 3 factors made it so. The first was the Reformation, whose aftermath was a series of wars throughout Europe, culminating in the 30 Years' War of 1618 to 1648.
The second was a cumulative effect of the invention of printing, the growth of literacy, and the massive spread of books, suddenly affordable for wide swaths of the population. The third was the maxim of the Reformation, sola scriptura, by the Bible alone, meaning that the Bible, not the church or tradition, was the sole authority in the religious life. These forces combined with explosive force and changed the face of Europe. In other words, the printing of the Bible allowed human beings to interpret it and to have their own, essentially their own personal relationship with God, not mediated through the church. Think about it. Who were the only people that were generally literate in medieval Europe? It was the priests. So people could not read the Bible for themselves. Every kind of interpretation, every view of the Bible was mediated through the priesthood. So that limited individual freedom. When people could read the Bible on their own and have their own personal Bible, and it was translated into the vernacular, people could come to their own conclusions about faith. You know, it's actually, this just occurred to me, but there is kind of something similarly going on right now, and that's the internet. The internet, you know, has absolutely changed the relationship between religious authorities and the individual. Now, you don't need me to figure out what the Hebrew Bible teaches about, let's say, homosexuality or prayer, or, you know, how many commandments there are in the Torah. You can just get on the internet and look that up. You don't need it. You don't need the. I mean, you people turn to me and to Rabbi Sarada and others because we have reputations, we have credibility, we have relationships. That's all true, but you don't really need that. You can get the information in other ways. You don't really need synagogues or churches to have any kind of connection to other people of similar faith. You can find that online. People do that all the time. I mean, think about doctors. Think about, you know, it used to be, I think my mom's on the phone. You know, my grandfather was a doctor, and the idea that a patient would come in and say, no, actually, have you considered this? That was unheard of. You didn't do that to the doctor. The doctor was the authority. You listen, doctor said, do this, you do that. Now, any doctor can tell you, and we all do it ourselves. We read up on something online, then we say, well, the doctor, have you considered this? Have you considered that? You know, so this is a world in which that those kind of authorities have the technical term is disintermediated. There's less of a hierarchy. And so that happened in the 17th century when it came to the Bible. And I would say, in a way, that's happening again today, much faster too, by the way, much, much faster. So this idea that the entire landscape of religious life changed in the 17th century and really planted the seeds for the kind of freedom and democracy that, you know, we in some ways take for granted in the Western world is quite true. Any questions about that? Just covered a lot of theoretical ground right there, but it's interesting stuff. Any questions? Okay, let's keep going. All right. So yes, this we've talked about before. The Hebrew Bible inverts the entire way of seeing the world. God is against the established powers, right? And this is Passover. This is the Passover story, essentially. God is against the Pharaoh, who's considered the greatest power in the universe. God stands with the oppressed. This is another great paragraph. This is at the top of page 130. The story of the Exodus with its plagues and the division of the Red Sea is not just about freedom. If it had been, the story could have been told without any of the miracles. That's a really good point. It is about God taking a stand against Pharaoh, and by implication, all absolute rulers who claim to be God, child of the gods, or chief intercessor with the gods. One of the key biblical projects is to demythologize and secularize power. This is really, really important. The idea that some individual or even some idea has absolute power rooted in some sort of mythology or irrational set of beliefs is something that Judaism turns on itself. It says that that's not the kind of God that's not the kind of beliefs that our God desires. The God of Israel desires human freedom. Okay. Here he talks about the God of Israelites is not only the God of the Israelites, but the God of everyone. This is another interesting angle. This now he simplifies this, but this is a whole discussion about how monotheism came about. And part of the argument for the evolution of monotheism is that in an earlier era, there were local deities assigned to different areas. The god of Egypt was the pharaoh who had control over Egypt. There were different territories with different gods. The God of Israel is not bound by geography. The God of Israel can deliver the Jewish people wherever they are. That is considered a kind of theological advancement in how we understand monotheism. It's more than local. Okay, let's keep going here. This is all, Jeremiah takes up that argument. Now we get to some really interesting philosophy here. This is just really okay. One of the arguments that Sachs makes is that Judaism has always had a suspicion of centralized power. And he points to in the Book of Kings, there's a time, I think it might even be in the Book of Judges, I can't remember, but the people want a king. The people want a king. Now, why do the Israelites want a king? They had to deal with Pharaoh in Egypt. Why do they want a king? Well, they say, look, we could easily be attacked and we could be destroyed. We're 12 tribes, but we need a king who can bring us together so we can defend ourselves. And the prophet Samuel says, well, just so you know, if you have a king, he's going to, take lots of taxes. He's going to require you to give up a lot of your animals. So there's going to be high taxes. And he's going to take all your children and send them into war, and also have a big harem. You really want a king? And the people say, yes, we do. And so from the very beginning, there is a suspicion of a kind of central leader. And so even in the Bible itself puts limits on the leader. The leader has to abide by Torah. So from the very beginning of Judaism, there is not an absolute monarchy. There is a monarch bound by the law, bound by Torah. That is again, what Sachs says is that this is a tremendous limitation on absolute power that has rarely been noticed. Most of people think the idea of a limited monarchy came into the world, in the 17th century with in Britain with William of Orange, or even the Magna Carta going a little earlier. But what Sachs says is actually it comes even earlier than that. When in the Hebrew Bible, where there were limits placed on divine authority. And Sachs says this was a really important, in the 17th, 18th centuries, there were all kinds of debates about the proper role of government. And Thomas Hobbes, who wrote the book, The Leviathan, who was, advocated for a very strong central government, he said, the life is nasty, brutish, and short. Without a strong government, people will eat each other alive. And he, quoted liberally from the Bible. Okay. So this is all interesting history. And then he gets to this is I would suspect, I never really again had a conversation. I wish I could have had a conversation with Sachs about this. But my guess is that Jonathan Sachs would fall closest in his political leanings towards libertarianism, but not pure. He would argue that too much power in any one location is very dangerous. But we should have strong local communities and synagogues. And he would essentially say kind of what Louis Brandeis said, is that the closer the institution is to the people, the more power it should have. The further it is from the people, the less power it should have. That local communities bound by traditions, they should be able to enforce, like if let's say you live in Highland Park, there's probably no problem with the strong zoning board. If that is sometimes we don't like it, but that would have some legitimate authority if in a small community, even better yet, if it's like a neighborhood subdivision, you had laws that people could arrive at. That's totally legitimate. But if you had a central government say, all the shingles on your house have to be, white or blue or whatever, that would be an infringement of authority. So it's not the laws itself that matter, it's where the power is located. And the closer the power is to the individual, the better. Because ultimately, what God desires is individual freedom. And but a society that's purely individual freedom, that's anarchy. So you can't have that. So how do you balance individual freedom and collective freedom and responsibility? And that Sachs says that's kind of what the Hebrew Bible is always trying to work out. That, by the way, that's the whole issue of modern politics generally, is about that. Here he says this. He says it very on page 132. He says, Abrahamic monotheism is based on the idea the free God desires the free worship of free human beings, nothing coerced. The historical drama of the Bible turns on the question of how to translate individual freedom into collective freedom. How do you construct a free society without the constant risk of the strong dominating and exploiting the weak? Very true. How do you preserve individual freedom while also protecting those who are vulnerable? Because any protection, in some senses, infringes on individual freedom. So there's no easy answer. That is the issue articulated by the prophets, and it was never completely solved. Politics is a problem for the Bible precisely because it believes that no human being should exercise coercive force over another human being. Politics is about power, and Abrahamic faith is a protest against power. So he's essentially identifying a major tension. This is to me, this is quite interesting. Basically, you have to have some element of power, but how do you make that element of power the least restrictive, and while also avoiding coercion? Okay, questions so far? Anyone see any relevance for this in today's world? What kind of, why is this important today? What do you see? Do you see any connections to modern life? I can tell you a few. One of them, think about it, it's in the news a lot lately, the filibuster, right? We hear a lot about the filibuster. Now, the filibuster, there's a lot of politics around it, but in its ideal form, not in how it's been used, but in its ideal form, part of the purpose of the filibuster is to protect the minority against the majority, right? That's what James Madison and Alexander Hamilton wrote a lot about, is that the greatest fear is tyranny of the majority, right? If the majority rules all the time, then if you can get 51 to 49, you're going to win every time. And you could trample on the rights of the other 49%. And so the filibuster was designed to kind of at least put a check on that. Now, obviously, it's been abused tremendously throughout history and many different ways. But the theoretical idea is that the minority needs to be protected as well. That democracy is not pure majority rule. That's also the role of the judiciary, right? The judiciary, the federal judiciary, is not elected. Some state judiciaries are. Federal judiciary is appointed. Now, it's appointed by those who are elected, so there is an element of popular will in it, but the judiciary is also meant to be a check on the popular will, once again, to preserve the right of the minority. So this is in some ways an expression of the idea Sachs is elucidating here, is that the question of how do you exercise power and create a society while also maintaining individual freedom, and how do you do that elegantly and in a durable way, and that's not easy. I mean, it's easy to go one way or the other. I remember I think Thomas Friedman wrote about this in one of his books, about how in China, they completed this massively beautiful railroad station in like 6 months. And that and then at the same time, it had taken about 3 years to fix an escalator on the Washington, D.C. metro. So 3 years to fix an escalator versus an entirely new train station built in 6 months. Okay, so one form of government is more efficient. When think about COVID. What happened in Wuhan? Essentially, what happened was, at a certain point of time, soldiers were placed all around the city. There were some homes where literally they were barred from the outside. So people literally couldn't leave their homes, and it stopped the spread, and so we don't do that in the United States. We are less efficient. And yet I would say most of us would probably say that we prefer our form of freedom over a kind of tyranny, even though tyranny can get certain things done much more efficiently than a democracy. So, in that, at least from Sachs' point of view, the Hebrew Bible establishes the dignity of the individual. This is the key point, that the dignity of the individual was not something that was taken for granted in life. I mean, throughout history, most individuals, think about wars. Individuals were pawns. It didn't, there's that great midrash about the building of the Tower of Babel, that, in the building of the Tower of Babel, the midrash says there was a big tower of people who were building the tower. And if a person fell and died, no big deal. Just add another person, because there were plenty of people. If a brick fell, though, people would sob, because a brick took a lot of work to make. People, they're disposable. Bricks, much less so. And he said the Hebrew Bible was the first to say the individual, the human being, is not disposable. And so we have this tension between the dignity of the individual and the efficiency of a larger society. And that tension remains with us today. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, he quotes Lord Acton. This we've all heard this. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why there have to be checks and balances. This is quite interesting. Can a political order exist without the use of power? That is a very interesting question. In other words, could our roads function without speed limits and cops? Well, speed limits you could have, but speed limit would only be enforceable because there are cops and lights. But so they're asking this question: could you have safe roadways without any kind of coercive power? As Nietzsche and Hannah Arendt understood, there's only one alternative, namely the act of promising. Interestingly, promising is the fundamental moral act. When I promise, I voluntarily agree to bind myself. It is this ability of humans to commit themselves to do or refrain from doing certain acts that generates order in the relation between human beings without the use of coercive force. Okay, so what he's getting at here is the idea of a social compact, that the best kind of political order is where we voluntarily entrust others with power, and they promise to use that power justly. And he calls it covenant. And that a covenant has to be voluntary, and it has to be based on trust. And this is very hard. Think about one of the things Sachs often talks about is the difference between a contract and a covenant. A contract is lays out a whole bunch of different conditions. And if those conditions aren't met, the contract is null and void, right? If you sign a contract for someone to put a fence in your house, as we did, and they mess up and they don't get the fence done properly, that contract is null and void. It doesn't, we don't have to pay them, and that's it. Go find another. A covenant is not null and void. A covenant is based on trust. So if for whatever reason, the fence, they didn't deliver it on time, a covenant would say, you know what, we have trust they're going to do that. Now, there is a role for contracts and covenants in every, there are certain things you want a contract for, and there are certain things you want a covenant for. It's not like one is superior to the other. They both have their place, kind of like an I-thou relationship and an I-it relationship. We don't want all of our relationships to be I-thou. If you're hopping in a cab or a bus, you don't necessarily want an I-thou relationship with your bus driver. You want to pay, you want to sit down, you want to get to where you want to go. So there are certain things in life that are good for contractual relationships. But there are also elements of life where covenant matters. And here, Sachs says that Judaism is built, the relationship between God and human beings is built on this relationship of covenant, that we voluntarily agree to worship God and to follow God's laws, and God doesn't exert coercive power over us. And that essentially then what he says is, and this is where he gets into some really great history on page 134, that covenant was reborn as the key idea of the new politics of the 16th and 17th centuries in Calvin's Geneva and the Dutch Republic, among the Scottish Covenanters and the English Puritans and the Pilgrim Fathers of America. Though it faded as an idea as Europe became more secularized in the 18th century, it has remained part of the vocabulary of American politics to this day. So he's essentially saying that this notion of a covenant is still part of our political life, that there is such thing as a common good. Yeah, this is beautiful. Yeah, and it goes here. Unlike hierarchical societies where rulers rule, a covenant society is always based on the mutual responsibility of citizens as a whole. The fate of the nation lies with the people, not with the rulers of the people. Really, really critical idea. And that covenantal politics is something that we should strive for. Yeah, he goes on, covenant always has a narrative. I mean, in the case of the Bible, it is the story of the Exodus. In the case of the United States, it's about journey from oppression to freedom in the New World, the almost promised land. Interestingly, Sachs points out this kind of interesting. The United States really is the only country in the world. I mean, no, that's probably wrong. It's probably not the only country, but it is certainly the most notable country that is built on a narrative. I mean, England, it's just the people, the Anglo-Saxons, whoever gathered there, and that was a tribe that emerged in that area. There's not a narrative story like the Exodus story behind most countries in Europe. The United States is built on this narrative. And that's, this helps us understand, I think overall this system is very good, but this system does have its downsides too. I mean, we know, think about individual rights and individual liberty, and think about the Second Amendment and gun violence. There are consequences to this narrative of freedom, and some of those consequences are unhealthy. There's no question about it. This is messy. There is something that is somewhat more efficient and in some ways better overall than in terms of preserving human life than total freedom. There's no question about it. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, he talks about the right brain and the left brain. I actually think he overdoes it a little bit here. He says covenant is politics scored for the right brain. I think he's overdoing it, but his point is that his point is getting at the difference between a covenant and a contract. A contract is very legalistic. It's based on these set of rules, whereas a covenant is based on trust, and it's about a kind of broader relationship.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat.
Yeah,
Is a
go ahead.
ketubah a covenant or a contract?
It's a great question. It's a covenant. Ketubah. I mean, yeah, that's a great example. So a marriage, like a ketubah is a covenant, whereas the civil marriage license, the license that you send into Cook County or to Lake County, that's a contract. That is just purely, this establishes this is a legal wedding, whereas a ketubah is a covenant. Now, in ancient times, a ketubah also served as a kind of a contract because there is contractual language in it. So a ketubah did serve in some contractual capacity in earlier times, but today it's a covenant. It has no legal standing. It's purely it's about a document that reflects and outlines your relationship. Marriage is itself, I mean, it's got a contractual element to it, but it is something that is purely covenantal. I mean, marriage is regulated by the state in a minimal way, very minimal. I mean, people can get divorced for essentially any reason. There's no restrictions on that. I mean, I guess there once were in American history, there were, but there really aren't today. So in some ways, marriage is very lightly regulated because it is primarily a covenantal. It's a covenantal relationship that it's bound by promises between two individuals that they enforce for themselves, that they don't rely on the state to enforce it for them. Of course, there are exceptions. You know, there are certain areas where there is some measure of coercive capacity. And by the way, actually, that shows you the good and the bad of that. You know, the fact that divorce is very easy, that may be good in some ways, but it's also bad in some ways. The fact that is very lightly regulated. I mean, look at the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are spent on divorce cases in attorneys and so forth, because it is very lightly regulated. And there are so many different factors. It's messier. Democracy is messy. Covenantal relationships, especially when they unravel, can be very messy. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Other questions about covenant versus contract? This, and let me, I love this paragraph at the bottom of page 135, because right now we are living in such a politically polarized, intense time. I mean, we all know that. We know how, you know, for many people, politics has become a kind of religion on both the right and the left. This is not this, you know, people get, you know, for some people, Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson is their rabbi, and for others, you know, Rachel Maddow is their rabbi. You know, this is how our society is right now, unfortunately. And here, Sachs says, politics in the Abrahamic vision is not the highest good. It is not where we meet. This is why I think he's a bit of a libertarian. It is not where we meet God, not where we construct our deepest relationships, not where we exercise our highest virtues, not where we achieve individual and national glory. It is a means to an end, no more, no less. It is there to secure peace, security, safety, and law-abidingness so that we can get on with our lives, serving God in work and worship and family and community, arenas we do not entrust to politicians in the state because they require absolute liberty. And it is the secondary nature of politics in the Judeo-Christian vision that is the surest guarantor against an intrusive state. Where politics is primary, politicians rule supreme. And where politicians rule, freedom is in danger. Ooh, that is some powerful, heavy stuff. You know, he is essentially saying that a healthy society doesn't worry too much about politics, that it is, politics exists to preserve human liberties, to help us become safe, and to provide an environment in which people can work and people can get along. You know, it has an important role. Obviously, we all support civil rights legislation and you know, the idea that people should be free. Environmental regulations so that there's a planet we can live in. I mean, obviously these things matter, but ultimately they're a means to an end. And the end is a flourishing human life, flourishing human relationships. That politics should be a means to achieving that end, where we have the freedom to pursue our own desires. Like that great quote from the book of Micah, where each person shall sit under their vine and fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. That's the ultimate end of politics. It's not an end in itself. I think obviously we are in a that's not where life is right now, and I think that's unhealthy to a degree. But it is where we are.
You know, Evan,
Yeah.
it strikes me that this is one of the places where the fact that British makes a difference in his writing too. That, you know, because despite the fact that people in Britain bemoan the loss of safety net for people there, that they still have a safety net that we don't have here in the United States, right? You know, nationalized medicine and healthcare and price supports and a whole host of things, you know, to help the poor survive, right? Which in the American, you know, so it's where his British libertarianism and American libertarianism, you know, he's really different from Rand Paul.
Yeah, that's a great
So-
point. Yes. Yes. He's assuming he's assuming a kind of base safety net, you know, and probably a bigger safety net than one that we have in the United States. And he's also, I think that's exactly right. And I think he's also speaking in ideals. You know, he's speaking on a kind of very high theoretical level that is somewhat impractical in day to day. You know, he's sort of speaking in principles, right? That there should be yeah, it's very, I mean, I wonder what he would say. Again, I wish I could ask him. I wonder what he would say about like smoking laws. You know, I guess, you know what, that's probably pretty easy because there's secondhand smoke and there's damage that could be caused. So, you know, and then environmental laws, he would say, you know, environmental laws, yeah, sure, we should be free to dispose of our waste as we wish. But if we dispose our waste and it harms somebody else, we're not free. So these are very tricky. But I would think he would say probably we need the least amount of government that we can get away with while preserving human dignity. That's probably the best.
And it's all contingent, though, on having a sense of, you know, a national, what's the language he uses? You know, we have to have a commitment to the common good.
Yes.
Right. You know,
Yes.
so then government is, if we all believe in the common good and we all have a sense of the common good. I mean, that's what Meredith mentioned in the chat, wearing masks during pandemic. I mean, the danger of our sort of radical freedom is, I don't have, how can you tell me that I have to wear a mask? You know, and because we've lost a sense of I wear a mask to protect other people, I'm only about my own personal freedom, then
Yeah.
you know, so that's what those people who aren't wearing masks are saying, right?
Right. Well, exactly. And I think what Sachs would say, what he would say for the ideal is that there shouldn't be a national law saying you must wear a mask, but that society should be one where everybody does wear a mask because we care about the common good, you know? And of course that's a tension because there are a lot of people who don't care about the common good. And so maybe we do need a law, but he would say that that is something that we should try to avoid having to get to that point. And I think Joe Biden kind of said the same thing, you know, at least early on, I remember. Okay, Sue. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I just did. Well, in talking about Jonathan Sachs and his perspective of writing from a British attitude, which makes sense seeing as he's British, or he was, their system really is so different because it isn't ruled by money the way ours is. And they don't have these long campaigns that go on for months with politicians begging for money every other day. They have very short, and everybody gets the exact same amount of money to spend on their campaign from the government.
Yeah.
It's not like it is here. And I think when he writes from, his attitudes are formed by what he's accustomed to. And this country is so different.
You're so right. Yeah. There is a certain, yeah, our system has become so dominated by money
Right.
that it is very difficult to figure out what the common good is, right? And do politicians really reflect the common good, or do they reflect the interests of a small portion of people? And
They're
it's
the big
also,
donors.
yeah, they're donors. And it's also very hard. I mean, people sometimes talk about Denmark and Scandinavia and Norway. Those are very homogenous countries. They're
Mhm.
like 99%, white, just very different than our diverse multicultural United States, which is built with immigrants and has so many different kinds of people. It's much easier to govern a kind of very homogenous place. It just is. When people think alike, it's easier. That's how it is. It's not better. That's a major different thing. But the what that kind of means is, in some ways, the United States, because we're so much less homogenous, we're very multicultural, we actually may need more laws to bring people together. This is a complex topic, but it's what the common good is sometimes maybe easier to define in a homogenous culture than it is in a very diverse culture. Not always. That's probably not. That's an oversimplification, but I do think that it's probably true. That the complexity of a society makes figuring out the common good more difficult because there are just more competing interests, which is fine. I mean, that's checks and balances. Competing interests are good. I mean, but it's hard. Yeah. Other comments or questions?
Well, I think that,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I agree with what you said, and I think then where does religion fit in, and how does it help? And I'm not asking rhetorically, how does it help the common good? I know that question came to me as I was reading it. And Sachs on 135 and the top paragraph says it is a politics inconceivable without God, for only belief in the sovereign of God is strong enough to set limits to human ambition and empower a population to overthrow those who overstep the bounds of liberty and justice for all. There's a lot there, and sometimes we're striving for the common good. Rules and regulations and laws are promulgated to help ensure that. And I sometimes wonder how religion really fits in.
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think it's changed. I think the role of religion has changed a lot over the last, let's say, 50 years. At an earlier era, religion and the common good were kind of two sides of the same coin. I mean, think about when under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s. That was only in the 1950s that I pledge allegiance to this flag and the United States, one nation under God. So God kind of reinforced the common good of unity. But that was a God kind of understood in the Protestant, way, a kind of one. And so essentially national interest and, Protestantism were connected. Now, I think religion serves the common good in that Well, it builds community among people. I mean, there's a reason synagogues and churches are tax exempt. They're considered to be a public good. They actually build community. They bring people together. People do social service projects. It establishes ties. It builds social capital. Religious organizations are also very good at. There's a lot of prison. What's that called? Recidivism. That religious organizations working with ex-prisoners reduce recidivism rates. Religions help, feed the hungry. There's a lot of common good that religious organizations do. There's harm too, but I think that that's sort of the theory behind it, is that they generally do activities that improve the larger community. Yeah. Other questions? Oh yeah, Meredith.
I think where a society is very, very diverse, as we are, rather than a homogeneous society, then responsibility takes on a greater import, because to preserve the common good means preserving the freedom of the minority.
Yeah, freedom of the minority. That is a tremendously good point. That is a tremendously good point. Okay, couple more things before we finish up. Okay, this is a key line here. This is on page 137. Abrahamic politics depends on a strong civil society to counterbalance the power of the state, a power that has an inbuilt tendency to grow over time. So essentially what he's saying is, look, in some ways, religious organizations serve the common good because they create local communities that can support one another. I mean, this is actually the Orthodox do this very well. In some ways, Orthodox communities don't need food stamps or broader health systems because they very much support each other, but it's very homogenous and very narrow. So there is an idea that local communities support each other so that they don't depend on the state. Now, this is getting very theoretical, and it never works out as crisply as people say it is, but that's sort of the idea. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, Thomas Paine, that's good stuff. Yeah, liberty of conscience. Yes, let's keep going. Yeah, this goes to that filibuster idea, 138. Today, our side holds power. We can impose our views on our opponents, but tomorrow they may hold power and they may do to us what we do to them. Therefore, we should have, essentially, he's saying that part of the argument for freedom of religion was that no one party is in power forever. So if you have part of the reason for enshrining a kind of freedom of conscience is because it allows a person to exist as a minority. And then he talks a little bit about England and the United States a little bit differently. There we go. The French, the Revolution, so forth. I love this line here. This is on page 140. Philosophy is about truth as system. The Bible is about truth as story. Systems are theoretical constructs, but stories are about people and the time it takes for them to change. Revolutions inspired by philosophy attempt the impossible, to create a new social order overnight. So what he's essentially, this is the culmination of his discussion of the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a revolution based on philosophy, and it was rapid and quick, and it failed. It was eventually, took a few years and then it was replaced by monarchy. The American Revolution was more of an evolution. I mean, think about it. It was British citizens revolting against British, king, and there was this was over time the colonies had developed a sense of independence, but it wasn't like they were overthrowing the old order. They were simply creating a new order built on the foundation of the old order. And there's a reason the United States and Britain have remained so close. I mean, it's the ideals of America were really derived in many ways from the ideals of Britain. It wasn't an overthrow. So, and the American Revolution essentially has lasted, whereas the French Revolution didn't. So it's kind of revolution versus evolution. How successful change really happens. I mean, this is obviously very relevant in every regard. Revolutionary changes rarely work because there's always a backlash, always. Just because if you change something so dramatically, that's not, human beings, we develop a comfort level, and our comfort levels can expand, but they expand slowly. And I think that's partly what Sachs is getting here, is that the Hebrew Bible, in a sense, what he would say is, he says this, the Hebrew Bible is more of an evolutionary document. The Israelites didn't go right from Egypt the next day into the promised land. It took them 40 years. For 40 years, they developed the habits and the new people to be able to deal with freedom. It was an evolution, not a revolution, and it succeeded. Had a few backtracks. There was the golden calf. There's a couple other incidents. So it's never not a straight path, but evolutions succeed where revolutions fail, because we're people. People are complex. Philosophy is a system based on ideals and ideas, whereas human beings are based on story and narrative, and evolution is more based on story and narrative. So this is all great stuff. Any questions? Questions about this chapter? Again, I guess we only got through one chapter. My mistake. I got too involved in these ideas, but this idea of freedom, I think, is so important. And there's just one on 142. This is so important and counterintuitive. My argument has been that, contrary to the received narrative, freedom has been better served in the modern world by a religious vision than by a secular one. The Abrahamic vision, with its insistence on the non-negotiable dignity of the human person and the importance of protected space, families and communities that make up civil society, where relationships are not based on power, saved England and America from the worst excesses of revolutionary politics that cost tens of thousands of lives in France and tens of millions in Russia. So what he's essentially saying is the ideals of the Hebrew Bible, evolutionary change, the inviolate dignity of the individual, that is rooted in the Hebrew Bible, and that's probably the greatest treasure of American society. Well, thank you, everybody. It's great to see you, and we'll continue obviously next week.
Thank
Great.
you,
I'll
Rabbi.
pick up
Thank
with-
you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
I'll
Rabbi.
pick up with chapter 8 then next
Thank
week.
you, Rabbi.
Yeah, chapter 8 next week.
Chapter 9.